Have you ever slept beside your husband, believing he was your safest harbor, only to realize he was waiting for your eyes to close to commit the ultimate betrayal? When my mother-in-law proudly flaunted my black diamond necklace to high society, she had no idea that stone held a secret capable of sending her family to prison. Welcome to a tale of bone-chilling revenge. Stay until the end. I promise. The conclusion will leave you breathless. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for your continuous support. Unfortunately, YouTube has demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to operate, which means we will be forced to stop uploading new videos here in the near future. We are transitioning our work to Patreon, so if you find today's story captivating, please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon, where you can listen to exclusive, true stories that are even better, much longer, and filled with highly detailed situations we cannot publicize on YouTube, all brought to life by multiple emotional voice actors. You can easily join us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us dive into today's chilling tale of betrayal as I introduce you to our protagonist, Hope Watkins. An architect knows better than anyone that a magnificent structure only collapses when its foundation is secretly rotting away from the inside. My name is Hope Watkins. I am 32 years old, and I serve as the lead architect at Axiom Pinnacle Architecture, one of the most ruthless and prestigious design conglomerates in Chicago. I built my life brick by brick, long before I ever put on a wedding ring. I used my own hard-earned wealth to purchase a sprawling penthouse in the ultra-exclusive Gold Coast neighborhood. It was my sanctuary, a fortress of floor-to-ceiling glass and cold steel, hovering high above Lake Michigan. It was a physical manifestation of everything I had achieved. Then came Julian. Julian was a charismatic, devastatingly handsome marketing director who knew exactly how to make a fiercely independent woman feel cherished. We married, and he moved into my fortress. With Julian came his family. His mother, Beatrice, was a fading socialite, a woman desperately clinging to the hollow ghost of her past high society glory, hiding her insecurities behind designer labels. His father, Arthur, was the exact opposite. Arthur was a self-made steel tycoon, a man forged from the very iron he sold. He was unimaginably strict, commanded absolute respect, and possessed a deeply rooted, venomous hatred for liars and frauds of any kind. Because of my profession, security was my ultimate obsession. My penthouse did not use anything as primitive as physical keys. I personally designed and installed a state-of-the-art biometric security system for the entire residence. To open the main doors, one needed to pass specific retinal scans and fingerprint recognition. There were no exceptions. Only 2 people in the entire world possessed the biological credentials to enter my home: myself and my husband, Julian. The first insidious crack in my perfect life appeared on a rainy Tuesday evening. I had just returned home early from a grueling business trip in London. The apartment was dead silent. I dropped my luggage in the foyer and walked down the hall toward my private home office, a room Julian knew was strictly off-limits to him. But the moment I pushed open the heavy oak door, a visceral wave of unease washed over me. It was the smell. Hanging thick and stagnant in the climate-controlled air was the faint, unmistakable scent of an expensive, aged cigar. Julian did not smoke cigars. Arthur did. But Arthur would rather die than visit my home without a formal, written invitation. My eyes scanned the room, searching for the source of the violation. That was when I looked down at the floor. Pressed deep into the pristine fibers of my white wool rug were the distinct, parallel tracks of small, heavy wheels. A liquor serving cart had been aggressively rolled across the delicate fabric. I found Julian in this kitchen, casually sipping a glass of water. When I confronted him about the intrusion, his heart rate did not even spike. "I had to call a technician to do some emergency maintenance on the air conditioning," he said smoothly, offering a warm, reassuring smile. "He must have brought a heavy tool cart in there. Honey, and the smell? It was probably just exhaust or oil from his mechanical equipment." His voice was like velvet, but my instincts were screaming a different story. The moment he turned his back, I pulled out my phone and opened the master security application that monitored my front door. I scrolled through the access history logs, tracing the timeline of the past 2 days. There was Julian arriving, there was Julian leaving, but then, right in the middle of yesterday afternoon, I found a bizarre anomaly. The system reported a complete, catastrophic data blackout lasting exactly 4 hours. It was not a random glitch. As an engineer, I knew exactly what I was looking at. Someone inside the apartment had intentionally severed the Wi-Fi connection to the security mainframe, deliberately blinding the cameras and erasing the entry logs for 4 solid hours. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I quietly walked back into my office and locked the door behind me. I knelt on the floor, getting down on my hands and knees to trace the wheel marks on the rug. They did not lead to the air conditioning vent. They led directly toward the darkest corner of the room, stopping right in front of where my heavy biometric safe was bolted to the concrete floor. As I leaned down, my breath caught in my throat. A small glint of white caught the ambient light from the window. I reached my fingers under the edge of the steel safe and pulled the object out into the light. Resting in the palm of my trembling hand was a single pearl earring, but it was not a real cultured pearl. It was a cheap, lightweight, faux pearl imitation. A violent shiver ran down my spine because I recognized it instantly. It was the exact type of embarrassing costume jewelry Beatrice always kept hidden away in her vanity, sneaking them into her wardrobe to wear interchangeably with her authentic pieces when she thought high society was not looking closely enough. My mother-in-law had been inside my private, locked office. She had been standing right in front of my safe, while the security system was conveniently murdered for 4 hours. I stared at the heavy, brushed steel door of the biometric safe hidden beneath the mahogany desk in my office. It was not merely a metal box. It was an impenetrable vault designed to protect my most guarded assets. Inside that cold steel chamber rested highly confidential architectural blueprints, the original property deeds to my penthouse, and resting at the very back in the darkest corner, a heavy black velvet box containing the single most precious thing I owned in this world. It was a solid black diamond necklace. You could not simply walk into a luxury jeweler on Fifth Avenue and purchase a piece like this for any amount of money. The stone had been passed down to me by my late grandfather in its raw, uncut form when I was just a little girl, for over 6 months. I had painstakingly drawn the geometric design myself, pouring my entire soul and architectural precision into every angle. Before commissioning a legendary master artisan in New York to cut the rough stone into a completely unique, one-of-a-kind masterpiece, it was my legacy, a tangible piece of my family history that anchored me to my roots. My breathing turned shallow, ragged, and thin, guided by a sickening, primal intuition. I reached out and placed my right index finger over the glowing glass of the biometric vein scanner. The machine let out a sharp beep. A soft, mechanical click echoed in the silent room, and the heavy door slowly swung open on its reinforced hinges. My hands shook violently as I reached past the thick stacks of legal documents and pulled the velvet box out into the light. I took a deep breath and flipped the lid open. Empty, the heavy black diamond was gone. I stared at the hollow, depressed indentation in the velvet lining, my mind completely short-circuiting. I ran my fingers over the edges of the safe. There were no scratches on the metal, no signs of a drill, no evidence of forced entry whatsoever. It was mathematically impossible for a stranger to breach it. That specific safe was programmed with advanced intravenous biometric technology. It did not merely scan the surface of a fingerprint. It required the pulsing, living blood flow of my specific veins to unlock the mechanism. My mind raced frantically, trying to find a logical, scientific explanation, until a dark, suffocating memory from exactly 3 weeks ago clawed its way to the surface of my brain. I had undergone a brutal dental surgery to extract 2 deeply impacted wisdom teeth that were pressing against my jawbone. The nerve pain had been absolutely agonizing, and my oral surgeon had prescribed a heavy, high-dose narcotic painkiller to help me cope with the recovery. I remembered swallowing 2 of those pills and falling into a deep, incredibly heavy, comatose state. I slept completely paralyzed, losing all concept of time, space, and reality for an entire weekend. For 48 straight hours, I was essentially a breathing corpse in my own bed, heavily medicated, numb, and completely unresponsive to the world around me. A cold, creeping horror began to spread through the center of my chest, freezing the blood in my veins. I did not scream. I did not run out to the kitchen and confront the man sitting casually at my island counter. Instead, my primal survival instincts took over, plunging my mind into a state of absolute, freezing clarity. I pulled out my encrypted mobile phone and immediately contacted my best friend, a top-tier cybersecurity expert who worked for a private defense contractor. I did not ask for advice or comfort. I demanded that she remotely bypass the local network of my penthouse and extract the hidden, localized data from a secret infrared camera I had installed in my master bedroom long before Julian ever moved in. It was concealed perfectly behind a large abstract canvas painting, operating on a completely independent, battery-powered loop that the main system could not detect. Sitting on the hardwood floor of my locked office, agonizing minutes ticked by until my phone buzzed with the decrypted video file. I opened the footage on my tablet. The video was in grainy, high-contrast black and white, time-stamped in the dead of night exactly 3 weeks ago, right in the middle of my narcotic-induced slumber. I watched my own limp, unconscious body lying flat on the mattress, my chest rising and falling in a deep, unnatural rhythm. Then, the bedroom door slowly crept open. Julian stepped into the frame. He was moving with calculated, terrifying precision, his face completely devoid of any emotion. He did not come to the bedside to check my temperature or gently pull the blanket over my bare shoulders. In his hands, he held a small, flat plastic container filled with a thick, putty-like substance. I recognized it immediately from my days in design school. It was medical-grade silicone molding clay. I watched, utterly paralyzed, as my husband leaned over my lifeless body. He gently lifted my limp right hand, with sickening, clinical care. He pressed my thumb deep into the soft silicone, holding it there firmly for 2 agonizing minutes to create a perfect, 3-dimensional inverse mold of my fingerprint and its underlying ridges. He was capturing the exact biological key needed to trick the optical scanner on the safe. The screen went dark, but the horrific image was permanently burned into my retinas. The air in the room suddenly felt entirely too thick to breathe. A violent wave of nausea slammed into my gut. I scrambled up from the floor, throwing open the door to my private ensuite bathroom, and collapsed hard onto my knees over the cold porcelain toilet. I vomited violently until there was absolutely nothing left in my stomach. Dry heaving as hot, stinging tears streamed down my face. The sheer, unadulterated terror of what I had just witnessed broke something fundamental and sacred inside of me. Julian was not just a common thief who had stolen a priceless family heirloom. He was a predator. He had watched me drug myself into a stupor, waited patiently for me to lose consciousness, and then he had crept into my most private sanctuary to physically violate my helpless, comatose body in the most cowardly, vile way imaginable. The man sleeping next to me was a monster, and my entire marriage was nothing but a sickening, orchestrated lie. The tears dried on my face, replaced by a cold, calculated rage. I am an architect. When a structure is compromised, you do not stand inside and scream at the walls. You step back, analyze the fault lines, and prepare for a controlled demolition. I did not say a single word to my husband. I washed my face, applied my makeup, and walked out of that bathroom acting like the exact same loving wife I had been yesterday. The very next morning, I purchased a military-grade micro-audio recorder and discreetly magnetized it deep underneath the driver's seat of Julian's luxury sedan. Simultaneously, I hired a private investigator, a former federal agent who specialized in forensic accounting, to tear into my husband's encrypted financial history. Within 48 hours, the polished illusion of the wealthy, aristocratic family completely shattered. The investigative report laid out a sickening reality. Julian was not the successful executive he pretended to be. He was drowning in millions of dollars of insurmountable debt. He had leveraged everything he had on high-risk cryptocurrency investments that had completely crashed, and then he tried to chase his losses at underground high-stakes poker tables. The most pathetic part was that his father, Arthur, had discovered the gambling addiction exactly 6 months ago. True to his ruthless nature, Arthur had completely severed all financial ties, cutting off both Julian and Beatrice without a single penny to teach his son a brutal lesson in accountability. That explained the desperate financial starvation. But it was the audio recordings from the car that revealed the true depth of their depravity. Sitting in my office with noise-canceling headphones, I listened to the crystal-clear conversations between Julian and his mother. Beatrice was terrified. Her entire identity was built on the perception of extreme wealth, and without Arthur's blank checks, she was suffocating. To maintain her status among the elite socialite circles, she and Julian had formed a disgusting alliance. The recordings explained the lingering cigar smoke and the heavy wheel marks on my rug. Whenever I was out of town on business trips, they were secretly using my penthouse to host private, lavish wealth appraisal parties for Beatrice's snobbish friends. I listened in absolute disgust as Beatrice bragged on the audio about my limited edition designer handbags and my temperature-controlled vintage wine collection, shamelessly claiming to her guests that every single item belonged to her. She was wearing my life like a costume to hide her own bankruptcy. But the most sinister revelation came on a recording from a Tuesday afternoon drive. The audio captured Julian and Beatrice finalizing a master plan, so diabolical it made my blood run cold. Arthur was hosting Chicago's largest annual philanthropic charity gala this upcoming weekend. It was the social event of the year, populated by the most powerful billionaires and media outlets in the state. "We have to make sure the appraiser gets his cut before the event begins," Julian said, his voice tight with panic over the hum of the car engine. "If those loan sharks do not get their cash by Monday morning, they are going to break both of my legs." "Mother." "Relax, Julian," Beatrice replied, her tone dripping with arrogant confidence. "The appraiser is fully compensated. He knows exactly what to say when I unveil the piece on stage. Everyone will believe it is our sacred family heirloom." The piece. They were talking about my black diamond. Their twisted scheme finally made perfect sense. Beatrice was going to bring my raw, custom-cut diamond to Arthur's charity auction and present it as her own historic family artifact. But they were not just stealing it. They were manipulating the entire market. They had actively bribed a fraudulent gem appraiser to officially evaluate the stone at an astronomically inflated price, pushing its certified value into the stratosphere. The plan was a flawless, multifaceted scam. They would auction the inflated diamond to some unsuspecting tycoon in the audience. Julian would quietly siphon off the massive cash payment through a shell corporation to pay back the violent men he owed money to in the underground gambling rings. Finally, Beatrice would take a tiny theatrical fraction of those millions and publicly donate it to the gala's charity fund. That small donation was the perfect smokescreen. It would publicly stroke Arthur's massive ego, forcing him to praise his wife in front of the entire city, completely blinding him to the fact that his own son and wife were running a criminal money laundering operation right under his nose. They thought they were untouchable. They believed they had orchestrated the perfect victimless crime while I was asleep and unaware. They were about to learn exactly what happens when you try to steal from a woman who builds fortresses for a living. For the next 4 days, I became the absolute epitome of the perfect, adoring wife. If Julian and Beatrice thought they were masters of deception, they had no idea they were dealing with an architect who specialized in building flawless facades. I smiled over our morning coffee. I asked him about his workday. On the morning of the charity gala, I even stood in our massive walk-in closet, meticulously steaming and ironing his absurdly expensive custom tuxedo. "You look so handsome in this," I murmured, smoothing the crisp lapels of his jacket as he stood before the mirror. I looked directly into his lying eyes through the reflection and smiled warmly. "You are the most reliable man I have ever known. Julian, have a wonderful time tonight. I have to stay late at the firm to finalize a massive project, but I will try my hardest to make it before the final auction." He kissed my forehead, completely oblivious to the fact that the project I was finalizing was the complete and total demolition of his entire life. The moment the heavy penthouse door clicked shut behind him, the sweet wife vanished, and the executioner took over. My first call was to the most ruthless, high-profile family law attorney in Chicago. I did not just file for a standard divorce. I initiated a scorched earth legal strike. Sitting in a sleek conference room, I handed my lawyer the encrypted tablet containing the black and white infrared security footage. The moment she watched Julian press that medical silicone mold onto my unconscious, heavily medicated thumb, her eyes widened in sheer disgust. By noon, a judge had signed a devastatingly strict restraining order against him based on severe physical violation and trespassing, effective immediately upon delivery. But the legal paperwork was only the foundation of my revenge. I needed the ultimate weapon to destroy their public charade without telling a single soul. I boarded a private charter flight to New York City. I went straight to the Diamond District to find the master artisan, the elderly genius who had personally cut my black diamond 5 years ago. When I sat in his secure workshop and explained exactly what my husband and mother-in-law were planning to do with his masterpiece, the old man was absolutely furious. It did not take much convincing to get him to board a flight back to Chicago with me that very same afternoon. More importantly, I had him bring the impregnable proof of ownership. I carried a reinforced leather briefcase containing the original, authenticated design blueprints with my signature, the official property tax receipts, and the ultimate trump card. My diamond was not just a shiny rock. 5 years ago, I had instructed the artisan to use a microscopic laser to engrave a unique 12-digit registration serial number deep into the pavilion of the stone. It was invisible to the naked eye, undetectable without specialized ultraviolet magnification equipment, and something a desperate thief like Julian would never even think to look for. By 5 o'clock in the evening, I was back in Chicago, standing in the center of my penthouse. The final phase of my trap was physical. I summoned a private biometric security firm on an emergency retainer. Within 2 hours, they completely ripped out the existing scanners on my front doors and installed a brand new, highly encrypted system. I stood there and watched the technician permanently delete Julian's retinal and fingerprint data from the mainframe. His access to my fortress was officially eradicated. While the technicians worked on the doors, I ruthlessly went through the apartment. I did not neatly fold his belongings. I grabbed thick, heavy-duty industrial trash bags and aggressively shoved every single designer suit, every expensive watch, and every pair of imported leather shoes into them. I dragged the heavy bags down to the damp, concrete storage unit in the basement of the building, tossing them into the darkness and locking the steel cage. The silence of the penthouse was deafening, but it was a beautiful, victorious silence. I walked into my dressing room and looked at the empty velvet box in my open safe one last time. Then, I turned to the full-length mirror. I reached for a breathtaking, floor-length crimson-red evening gown. It was bold, unapologetic, and the exact color of spilled blood. I slipped it on, clasped my favorite gold heels, and applied a sharp, flawless coat of deep red lipstick. I was no longer the unsuspecting wife asleep in the dark. I was a weapon, fully loaded and ready to walk into their high society theater to turn their pathetic masquerade into a public graveyard. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel was a suffocating sea of extreme wealth and blinding arrogance. The ceiling was weighed down by massive cascading crystal chandeliers, casting a golden ethereal glow over Chicago's absolute elite. Men in tailored tuxedos and women dripping in rented couture clinked crystal champagne flutes, completely ignorant of the poisonous reality slithering beneath their feet. At the main entrance, Arthur stood like a commanding general, shaking hands with media moguls and state senators, his posture radiating the strict, unyielding integrity he so proudly built his empire upon. Drifting through the crowd, radiating a sickening aura of unearned triumph, were Julian and Beatrice. They floated from table to table, laughing loudly, acting as if they were the brightest, most untouchable stars in the entire universe. They were so thoroughly intoxicated by their own impending victory that they completely failed to notice my presence. I had arrived deliberately late, slipping through a side door reserved for catering staff, and taken a seat in a dimly lit, elevated VIP alcove completely obscured by heavy velvet drapes. From my hidden vantage point, I watched them like a hawk tracking its prey. The dull roar of the crowd quieted into a hushed, respectful silence as the main event commenced. The charity auction was the crown jewel of the evening, after several minor luxury items were quickly sold off to polite applause. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the podium and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer proclaimed, his voice booming over the state-of-the-art sound system, "we have arrived at the pinnacle of tonight's gala to present our grand finale, a piece of unimaginable historical and monetary value. Please welcome our esteemed hostess, Beatrice." The applause was deafening. Beatrice glided up the carpeted stairs to the stage with the haughty, majestic grace of an aristocratic queen. She approached the microphone, dramatically placing a hand over her heart, performing a perfectly rehearsed display of fake humility. "Thank you all so very much," Beatrice cooed, forcing a slight, emotional tremble into her voice. "Tonight is about community. It is about sacrifice. My family has always believed that true privilege means giving back to those who have nothing. Therefore, it is with a heavy but joyous heart that I offer up my most treasured possession. This is our sacred family legacy, passed down through generations, and tonight, I sacrifice it for the greater good of this wonderful city." She gestured elegantly to a pedestal in the center of the stage. A white-gloved attendant stepped forward and swiftly pulled away the black velvet cloth. A collective, audible gasp echoed across the massive ballroom. Resting under the harsh, blinding beam of a single overhead spotlight was my black diamond. The massive, flawlessly cut stone absorbed the light and reflected it back in sharp, aggressive flashes of dark brilliance. It was a terrifyingly beautiful anomaly among the sea of traditional white diamonds in the room. The sheer size and impeccable, aggressive geometry of the cut made it look less like jewelry and more like a captured piece of the midnight sky. The auctioneer did not waste a single second. "We shall start the bidding at $200,000. Paddles began shooting up into the air immediately. Billionaires and corporate titans threw their financial weight around in a frantic bidding war, desperate to claim the anomaly on the stage. "300,000, the auctioneer chanted rapidly. "Do I hear 4? 400,000 to the gentleman in the front, 500,000 from the lady in blue." Down on the floor, standing right at the edge of the stage, Julian was practically vibrating out of his skin. I watched his eyes gleam with a raw, predatory greed that made my stomach turn. He was muttering rapidly to himself, nervously tapping his fingers against his thigh as he mentally calculated the exact amount of cash that was about to magically erase his massive, life-threatening debts. He thought he had won. He thought his life was saved. $700,000, the auctioneer yelled, pointing his gavel across the room. "Do we have another bid?" "Yes, right there. $800,000. The room held its collective breath. $800,000 for a single stone. Julian closed his eyes and let out a long, shaky breath of pure relief. $800,000 going once, the auctioneer called out, raising the wooden gavel. Going twice. I stepped out from the shadows of the alcove. Reaching for the secondary audiovisual control microphone mounted on the wall panel right next to me, I flipped the master override switch before the gavel could strike the podium for the third and final time. My voice sliced through the heavy silence of the ballroom. It was female, crystal clear, and as cold as absolute zero. "I am so incredibly sorry to interrupt this beautiful speech." My voice boomed through every single speaker in the grand hall, completely drowning out the auctioneer. But Illinois state law strictly prohibits the public auctioning of stolen goods. The entire ballroom froze in a state of absolute, paralyzed shock. Hundreds of heads violently whipped around, searching for the source of the disruption. I stepped out of the darkness and into the light of the main floor. In my floor-length crimson-red gown, I looked like a walking inferno against the muted black and white tuxedos of the crowd. Every single eye in the Waldorf Astoria locked onto me. I did not rush. I walked slowly and deliberately down the center aisle of the ballroom, Flanking my left side was the elderly master jeweler from New York, carrying his reinforced leather briefcase. Flanking my right side were two fully armed, uniformed Chicago police officers, their hands resting firmly on their duty belts. The execution had begun. The atmosphere inside the grand ballroom instantly dropped to absolute zero. The sweeping orchestral music had stopped. The clinking of crystal champagne glasses ceased entirely, and the heavy silence was broken only by the sharp, rhythmic clicking of my gold heels against the polished marble floor. Up on the stage, Beatrice's face drained of all color, turning a sickening, ashen gray beneath her heavy layer of expensive makeup. Panic completely seized her features. She violently gripped the wooden edges of the podium, leaning into the microphone, her voice shrill and trembling with raw terror. "Security!" Beatrice shrieked, pointing a violently shaking finger directly at me. "Guards, get this deranged woman out of here right now. She is completely insane." I did not stop. I did not flinch. I walked right past the bewildered tycoons and ascended the carpeted steps onto the main stage. I offered Beatrice a polite, chilling smile, then gestured for the master jeweler to step forward. He placed his heavy leather briefcase onto the display table, snapping the brass locks open. I turned to the event coordinator, who was standing frozen near the heavy velvet curtain. "Bring me an ultraviolet appraisal light," I demanded. My voice left zero room for negotiation or debate. Right now, a flustered technician scurried forward from the shadows, handing me a small, heavy black flashlight. I held it out to the jeweler. With steady, practiced hands, the elderly man lifted the massive black diamond from its velvet pedestal and turned it upside down. He clicked the ultraviolet light on, shining the intense purple beam directly onto the pavilion of the stone. "Look at the main projection screens," I instructed the crowd, nodding to the camera operator filming the auction. The high-definition camera zoomed in on the stone, casting the image across the massive digital screens flanking the stage. There, glowing and harsh, undeniable neon blue against the pitch-black carbon, was a microscopic, 12-digit registration number. I pulled the authenticated certificate of ownership from the briefcase and held it up to the camera lens. The numbers were an exact, flawless match. A huge wave of shocked whispers rolled through the wealthy crowd, but I was nowhere near finished. Proving the theft was just the prologue. The real execution was about to begin. I pulled a small, silver flash drive from my evening clutch. Without asking for permission, I stepped over to the main media console, shoved the drive into the primary port, and completely bypassed the slideshow of charitable foundations. The giant screens above the stage flickered violently. The glowing image of the diamond vanished, replaced by the grainy, high-contrast black and white infrared footage from my master bedroom. The ballroom fell into a horrifying, suffocating silence as hundreds of Chicago's most powerful people watched my heavily medicated, completely unconscious body lying limp on the mattress. They watched as the bedroom door opened. They watched Julian creep into the frame. When the video showed Julian pulling out the medical silicone and forcefully pressing my lifeless thumb into the mold to steal my biometric data, the shocked whispers of the crowd rapidly morphed into audible gasps of absolute horror, followed immediately by shouts of pure disgust. Women covered their mouths in sheer terror. Men shouted angry profanities toward the stage. Standing at the foot of the platform, Julian looked like a man who had just been shot in the stomach. He staggered backward, his hands trembling violently, his perfectly styled hair now disheveled as he began to hyperventilate. Then, heavy footsteps shook the wooden stage. Arthur, the iron-willed patriarch, marched up the steps. His face was completely devoid of blood, pale with a level of humiliation and rage that I had never seen in a human being. The absolute core of his identity, his strict demand for integrity and truth, had just been publicly butchered by his own flesh and blood. He did not shield his wife. He did not attempt to comfort his son. He marched directly to the podium and ripped the microphone from the stand. "Effective immediately," Arthur bellowed, his voice echoing like thunder over the disgusted crowd. "Julian is no longer a member of this family. I am formally revoking his entire inheritance, striking his name from every single trust fund, and severing every corporate tie. And as for you, he turned his furious, burning eyes toward Beatrice, who was now weeping hysterically on the floor. You are to pack your bags and get out of my house tonight. You will not see another dime of my money for as long as you live. Before the echoes of his booming voice could even settle, the two uniformed Chicago police officers moved in. They grabbed Julian by both of his arms, spinning him around forcefully. The harsh, metallic snap of steel handcuffs echoed loudly over the sound system. Julian, the taller officer stated firmly, locking the cuffs tight against his wrists. You are under arrest for grand larceny and unlawful bodily intrusion. You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you use it. Julian collapsed onto his knees, dragging the heavy officers down with him. The charming, arrogant marketing director was gone, replaced by a pathetic, sobbing mess. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, begging for mercy in front of the entire city. "Hope, please," Julian begged, his voice cracking in sheer desperation. "Please do not do this to me. I had no choice. The debts were going to kill me. I was backed into a corner." I looked down at him. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no anger, just the cold, satisfying finality of a perfectly executed demolition. I stepped around him without saying a single word. As I did, my attorney stepped out from the front row. She leaned down and shoved a thick envelope directly into Julian's bound hands. "Those are your unilateral divorce papers, along with a judge-ordered restraining order," the lawyer said sharply, making sure the nearby microphones picked up every single word. "Do not try to go back to the penthouse. Your biometric access has been permanently revoked, and every single thing you own is currently rotting in a garbage bag in a basement storage unit. You have absolutely no home to return to." I picked up the black diamond from the table. With a slow, deliberate movement, I clasped the heavy platinum chain around my own neck, letting the massive stone rest exactly where it belonged. I turned my back on the pathetic wailing of my soon-to-be ex-husband and the hysterical sobbing of my mother-in-law. I kept my head held high, my posture perfectly straight, and walked slowly down the center aisle, leaving the Waldorf Astoria and a shattered, fraudulent aristocratic family completely in ruins. Trust is not a weakness to be exploited, and the absolute price of betrayal is losing every single thing you have. Thank you all so very much for listening to this story until the very end. I truly appreciate your time and your wonderful presence here. Where are you listening from today? Please let me know in the comments. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will not be able to upload new videos here in the near future due to our channel losing its monetization, and we are moving our operations entirely to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's journey and want to support us, please help by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon. There, you can listen to exclusive, much longer true stories with incredible, dramatic details that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join us by scanning the Patreon QR code right on your screen, or use the link provided in the description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again. Stay safe, and I will see you there.